The new channel. The new channel. Hashtag TNCNow.
The views, opinions, and insights expressed in the following shows are those of the host, producers, guests, and viewers. They do not necessarily reflect the position of the channel. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to the new channel.
Our passion transforms a community that sees and shares all things new.
This is Ayana Garcia streaming from Colorado Springs, Colorado, USA.
And this is Billones from Manila, Philippines.
This is the GNA podcast on TNC Express.
Welcome again to another webinar this Saturday. Thank you for spending your time again with us.
I have a new friend, and at first there were very serious people.
Magandang araw and mabuhay, Chairman Ayana.
First of all, I'd like to greet my co-host. A happy birthday.
Thank you.
I hope you're enjoying your day today. And what a way to celebrate your birthday here in the Philippines with a new episode, especially celebrating the power of the youth and activism. So, for today's episode, it's difficult to navigate through digital spaces, let alone be always on the top of the fast changing landscape. And this kind of difficulty transcends across generations, may it be the Gen X, the millennials, or even the rising dominators of the online world, the Gen Zs. But some people champion and drive online conversations with ease. And dealing with smart shaming, call out culture, cancel culture, fighting against trolls, launching a youth force, working on a digital media giant, and what have you, he has dealt with it all.
Joining us today is a fellow from the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, or YCLE. Jules Guiang, the current Communications and Events Coordinator at the Asian Development Bank, has an extensive background in media and community leadership. He began his career as a reporter for PTV4 from 2012 to 2014 and subsequently transitioned into a TV host role for the same network from 2014 to 2020. Besides his work in media, Jules have made significant contributions to youth empowerment and community development. In 2014, he established the National Alliance of Youth Leaders Incorporated and later founded the 2030 Youth Force in the Philippines. He also served as a youth empowerment consultant for the UNDP Asia Pacific. Jules Guiang's diverse experiences include a role as the head of community for Rappler in 2021. Currently, he holds the position of president at the Maginhawa Food Community Inc, which is an organization representing a collection of restaurants in the renowned food street of Quezon City.
Hi everyone. Hi Gab and Ayana. Hello.
Hi, Jules. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're very excited to have you here in this episode. For to start off, I'd like you to share about when did you start your active participation in different advocacies? Because I know you're from UP, but when exactly did you start to have this kind of awakening and active involvement in different movements and advocacies?
Well, yeah, I think it all started when I was a student leader in UP. But my belief was after graduating in 2014, the challenge was how I can personally continue these advocacies even after being elected in student council. Because I think that's the measure of a genuine citizen as a genuine student leader that even though you're not elected anymore, how can you continue these advocacies? So that's the reason actually why we created the National Alliance of Youth Leaders. So it was more of a collective decision of my colleagues back then. How can we continue our advocacies even after student council? And after that, it all continued to establishing the 2030 Youth Force for the SDGs and other groups as well. So yeah, in 2014, it all started there.
Thank you for sharing. I'd like to point out that you started when you were still a student leader, right? I wanted to know more about the challenges of working in a development workspace, especially when you're still starting young. You don't have money, you don't have a lot of
Yeah.
resources and network. So, what are the major difficulties that you encountered during the stages?
Yeah, for sure. It was the top of the list would be the lack of resources. I mean, for sure, other student leaders and youth leaders there will relate. It's the lack of resources, but to be able to win over that challenge, it's really on the power of partnerships. How can you pitch your ideas, your activities or your projects or programs to groups, to individuals who would like to invest in your idea. So it's more on having a good skill on storytelling, on how can you convince other people that your idea is a worthwhile initiative. So yeah, I think top of my head right now is the lack of resources.
I love that. I love that you emphasize that even although even if you had the lack of resources, the challenge was to prove. And well, it looks like for from 2014 you're able to prove that, regardless of that challenge of starting young,
Mhm.
lack of resources, and obviously
Yeah.
without to start with that
Mhm.
without nothing, it's such a challenge. And so,
Mhm.
Jules, I know you have like extensive experience, working closely with young people, witnessing the significant transformations in youth participation over the years. Like 2014, that's a long time ago. And you've witnessed and went through with all of that. And considering these developments, do you believe that today's youth are more actively engaged or more indifferent towards social issues, just based on your experience way back 2014 and the status quo right now?
I think way back in 2014. So I just did the math and that was almost 10 years ago pala. Wow. So almost a decade ago. I think the difference between the youth back then and the youth right now is the youth of today is more heavily connected because of social media. Because back then, I mean, of course, we had Facebook already and Twitter, etc. But right now, I mean, you have AI, you have other platforms, you have Discord. I mean, the Gen Zs right now have a different kind of language already. So I think they're more social media savvy. They are the digital natives right now. I like to believe. So I think they have the edge on which platforms to use, which communication, which language to use to be able to, reach out and mobilize people from social media. But I think the challenge right now across all generations is okay, you're active online, but how can you translate that to offline impact, right? I think at the end of the day, that's still the measure of success for any digital endeavor. How can you translate that offline? Because considering data right now, I mean, it's not 100% that all Filipinos are connected already to social media. So how can we translate those digital efforts to offline efforts?
I love that. And you've actually, because I have a follow up question, you've actually talked about that. Speaking of social media, and I love the, coining the term digital natives. I think I'll be using that moving forward. So with that being said, I would like to explore one of your, remarkable experience or accomplishment, co-founding the 2030 Youth Force of the Philippines, which boasts an impressive, following of 27,000 on Facebook, a community of 3,600 members. And with that, could you please share with us the journey of, igniting and nurturing a youth-led movement like this?
Um, in 2016, I think. Yeah, 2016. So it all started with a Facebook post. So I just posted on Facebook, are there any interested people here to collab for the Sustainable Development Goals? And then a lot of people, colleagues and even new faces, new people commented there, and they showed their interest that they're interested with the SDGs. And from then, we created Facebook group, I think, or a group chat. And then we just brainstorm on what we want to do. And then months after, we had the 2030 Youth Force in the Philippines. So it all started with the Facebook post. And then right now, we're collaborating with institutions, with UNDP, with other government agencies, etc. So I think that's one example of how you can use social media for social good. Diba? I mean, that was a concept back then when we were students. I think we're contemporaries, right? When we were students in the early part of the 2010s, etc. The concept of social media for social good. But right now, the difference is social media is being weaponized for so many reasons, right? So I think the messaging right now is how can we take back the space of social media for social good. A lot of us in our sphere, no, in our arena, are still really doing a lot of things to make sure that social media will be used for social good. So how can we think of ways to collectively take that space back again for social good, despite the proliferation of disinformation among others. So I think this is one of the things that we should think about. Sorry, lumayo ako sa mga usapan. Alam ko youth force lang yung pinag-uusapan natin. Sorry.
Actually, you're not. We're actually leading towards that later on. But Jules, you have worked with different media outlets in the past. You've worked with PTV and also with Rappler. How would you
Mhm.
describe the current state of media in the country right now? Do you think our media landscape is eroding, or what are your thoughts on this one?
I think since time and again until now, it's still media is still being threatened by so many forces. Either by the government, those powerful people. So the challenge for our friends in the media sector is how can we continuously, fight for democracy on the bigger level, right? Because we have a thriving democracy so long as you have a stable and thriving media space. Um, Especially during the pandemic. I mean, coming from the previous administration, there were heavily attacks on independent media, on critical media, on media that is critical to the government. So being critical is not being opposition. It's basically more on the media doing their jobs, right? The media is there. Before social media, journalists were the gatekeepers of truth. That was the concept of being a journalist back then. But right now, because social media was able to somehow equalize the playing field, that anyone could become a journalist at their own right. But the difference is people should take note of this, that journalism takes a lot of process of of training. And when I say of process in simple terms, journalists journalists don't just write down or cover stories and then they just upload it on their platforms. It takes so much process. There's an editor. There are so many people in the newsroom to vet their stories. So there's a process, and that's the difference with other people doing content creation. I mean, I am not demonizing other content creators, because there are a lot of content creators who are also doing self censorship. So that's the difference. with journalists, they have a sense of accountability. They're accountable to themselves. They're accountable to their newsroom, to their companies. Meanwhile, for individuals, usually they're just accountable to themselves. So it's more on being responsible enough on which kind of stories, what kind of languages will they use. So yeah, I think up until now, I mean, like Rappler, good thing some of the cases from for Maria Ressa was already dismissed, but there are still other cases pending right now. So it's still a manifestation that media is still threatened. I mean, in the beginning of this administration, there was Percy Lapid, right, was killed. Um, right before going to his radio booth. So one life is too much already, right? So I think that's the current state of media right now in the Philippines, still threatened.
Okay, thank you, Jules,
Yeah.
for saying that. No, before I give you like the second question on media, I want to ask if you still have plans on going back to working in a media organization.
Um, I think yes. Right now, I think I'm taking this as a brief break because after the very tiring and yeah, exhausting election coverage from last year, I am taking a quick break from the media sector. But I feel that, and I really want. I think media is still my passion up until now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're looking forward to that one. Last on media, Jules. In last year's survey of Pulse Asia, it was revealed that majority of Filipinos believe that journalists and media are the second biggest sources of disinformation or fake news in the Philippines. What is your take on this eroding trust of the public to the media, and how do we actually reclaim this kind of public trust?
Yeah, that's a very sad reality, that the majority of the respondents, at least of that survey, do not uh, really rely on media or journalists for their information. Um, I think it's not really the fault of the consumers or the people. It's more on because of social media, as I mentioned, social media was able to equalize the playing field. So it's more on how media can be more accessible to the consumers. Because I mean, just go to YouTube or to Facebook or to TikTok, of course, right? TikTok. They can they can just subscribe to any person and be their source of information on a daily basis. So how can media replicate that kind of accessibility? Because from before, I mean, as a consumer as well, there's this feeling of a wall, right, from a media outfit, that it's an institution that usually I mean, yeah, newscasters or journalists are usually apart from the public. But right now, I mean, for instance, TV, ABS-CBN, they have this Patrol ng Pilipino concept right now, right? The mobile journalism. So, that kind of approach is an approach that tears down the wall of media between the consumers. So I think that's a good strategy to make the consumers feel we're alike, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're citizens as well. We also use our phones, like how you do it. We use our phones to take pictures, to take videos. So we also do that. But the difference is we're using our phones to create stories, factual stories for you. So I think it's the challenge right now is with the media on how to make themselves more out there, accessible. And to be fair to our colleagues in the media, they're really doing so many strategies to make that happen. From the end of consumers, I mean, it, it's so easy to say, no, but usually we all have our biases, right? The only thing is, are your biases for the truth or what? And that's another debatable point because when you're talking about the truth, it has so many layers. It has so many versions right now. So I think it takes creativity for our friends in the media and the advocates as well. The advocates should also help the media sector to make people realize that, hey, let's go back to the once gatekeepers of truth, because they've been studying that for the for so many decades. I mean, it's their job to create to relay the truth to the people, right? So yeah, that's my take on that.
Well, thank you, Jules. Now, we've talked about that aspect. Let's flip it on the other side. I'd like to, delve into your personal encounters, if you have some, with trolls, smart shaming, cancel culture, and/or call out culture, being an influencer within your generation. What are your thoughts on these trends? Do you believe they are worthy of celebration? Or, you could share some of your own experiences in dealing with them if you've encountered any.
So when I was in PTV, so I was with PTV for 8 years, right? And as you know, PTV is a state media. So it's being run by the government. So obviously, the content that we produce, the mandate of PTV basically is to propagate the programs of the government, because it's the mandate. So basically, us hosts of, or I was a host before of BT4. That was my main task. So during that time, the criticisms I was getting on almost a daily basis was I was a puppet, I was a mouthpiece of the government, something like that. And I mean, coming from UP, right? With my classmates or my batchmates who are very critical of the government. So I think it goes without saying that it's pretty normal that I would be getting um kind of criticism. But it's more on my belief during that time was I'm in the government not for an individual or a personality. I'm there for to serve the people, basically, because I still think that government can still be a good place to make meaningful changes in society, because at the end of the day, it's their job, right, to do that. So that's the usual criticism I was getting back then. And then when I transferred to Rappler, obviously a turn of events, the usual criticism I was getting was I'm a communist, I'm an anti-government, etc. So kumbaga parang I was able to navigate both worlds within a decade, right? Being part of government and being part of a media that is critical of the government. So my realization there is there's a division within our society, really, because I was a witness of that. I was a receiver of those kinds of criticism. So um cancel culture, I think if there's one platform that you can see this on almost a daily basis or a weekly basis, it's on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
The joke there is, how do they say this? Parang ikaw yung nabunot for this week, something like that. So you're the topic, you're the lucky or the lucky person to be canceled this week. You're the main topic for this week.
Yeah.
So I think my take on cancel culture is, as I always say in the lectures of Gab's organization in Break the Fake, it's more on it should be call out culture, because I think with cancel culture there's no redemption basically when you're canceling, because when you're canceling you feel like, for example, with Tony Gonzaga, she was canceled so many times because of obvious reasons, right? But from our end, as the canceller, there's an instant pleasure that you were able to cancel this celebrity without realizing that she is still Tony Gonzaga. She still has the connections. You just canceled her in this particular platform, but she's still Tony Gonzaga. And is able to, get opportunities. Kumbaga parang lumipat lang siya ng ibang mundo, 'di ba? And she still has the clout, etc. So usually cancel culture is being used against powerful people, celebrities, among others. But to me, what's more effective is to call out culture, because there's a process of giving change a chance. Basically, you're reaching out to the person, that telling this person that, hey, your stance on this issue is problematic because of this and that. You're trying to engage rather than cancel immediately a person. Because if you're calling out influential person which has a good network, I mean, imagine making this person have a change of stance on a particular issue. So, for example, if this person is anti-LGBT, and then you're able to convince this person that, hey, equality, etc., etc., and then if that person will have a change of mindset, that person can influence his or her network, right? So I think that the best way here is to call out, give change a chance, and then yeah, just engage and don't cancel, just like that. Yeah.
I love that. Well, before everything else, I admire your courage to be vulnerable, specifically moving from, one channel or one entity towards the next. And it's been a whirlwind for me, just looking at, coming from now in a different place and hearing everything from media. Also, thank you for sharing that perspective on media itself, because it can be very challenging, and I really admire the position where you're at and where you're now, and be able to be vulnerable, and take on those challenges, and still set as an example of, as this generation that we're facing or being labeled for what we are, we're
Mhm.
able to go with the flow and adapt to the challenges and whatever come our way. So props to you.
Mhm. Thank you.
I wanna join this conversation, no, on the two before I'd like to start a new question, Jules. I have some
Yeah.
thoughts on the previous points you've raised, no, about making media more accessible, that being the first task at hand, but that too is a challenge given that some of our broadcast giants do not have the franchise to reach rural communities. And on second point as well, on the influencers having platform, there are certain influencers who do enjoy the clout, even if it's not really that of a positive ordeal. I mean, it's
Yeah.
easy for them to just, cancel businesses, and still a lot of media entities are giving them that kind of platform. So, I
Oh
mean,
yes.
this is really a tricky situation or landscape even for some media companies, and I think it's important that we call out certain media entities that are giving some content creators and influencers the platform to
Hmm.
enable misogynist remarks and what have you. um before I just wanted to point that out, but anyway, my question really is about the youth now, because this is where you really are specializing with. How can we encourage the youth, especially those considered Gen Zs, to use
Hmm.
their being digital natives for
Yeah.
activism?
Well, I think for that part, um, we should go back to the basics first and make them understand what activism is. Because in the past years, activism has been heavily demonized, as activism is like equals to communism, as if communism is evil, right? So it's more on making them understand what activism is. And in simple terms, what I always say, activism is basically a way of life beyond oneself. It's more on having a change of perspective, that you're not just a yes person, that you'll just accept everything that is laid out to you, just support everything because those elected did this or did that, or those were their decisions. It's more on having a critical mindset. I mean, we are being educated for that, right? Especially um, if you are a student and you feel that activism is bad, you the challenge for you right now is how can you make your education purposeful as early as now. I mean, you do not need to wait to graduate and go to the workforce to have an impact and to make I mean to make your education like a good investment for you. As early as now, you can um make your education purposeful already. So that's number one. Engage with we need to engage the youth and make them understand that activism is not bad after all, but a way of life. Number two is how can they maximize their creativity? I mean, there are so many content creators right now who are using their creativity, right? They have skits, they have so many kinds of strategies to engage their audience, and then you realize that, oh, okay, that particular content has a deep message apparently, so that kind of creativity, so we should encourage them more to use their TikToks, their Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc., to use those platforms and then inject um a strategic messaging about how people can care more for society, basically. And number three, the Gen Z should realize their strengths. How can they create impact collectively? I mean, the data shows right now, right, that they have a huge following because th- they are digital natives, so they know this word basically. So kumbaga mas gamay nila yung ginagalawan nila ngayon eh. Because during our time, again assuming that we are contemporaries, um we were in the phase of transition between pre-social media to social media, but this generation right now is purely social media, right? So from our end, we from our generation, at least the millennials, we understand the value of offline efforts, right? And then we also understand the value of online efforts. But right now, it's purely online efforts. Plus, you had the pandemic, right? 2 years pandemic of just being in your houses. So, kumbaga parang it was pounded further that it's all social media right now. So it's more on, I think our messaging to the youth of today is go ahead and maximize your creativity on social media, but never forget to also reach out offline because not everyone is in social media. And this is my usual spill to those using Twitter, to those who feel that Twitter is basically the whole Philippines already. It's not. I mean, go to read up data right now, it's just fifth, usually on the fifth in average among all social media. Facebook and YouTube is still on the top right now, and that's on social media. How about beyond social media? There still millions of Filipinos who do not have smartphones or even access to Wi-Fi. So we should always remember them that when we are thinking of activism, don't just limit it in the world of social media because if we want to create impactful change, as the SDGs would always say, we shouldn't leave no one behind, right? So if you are planning to create campaigns or yeah, any campaigns, you should also think of the people beyond social media.
Thank you for sharing. And I love that you came up with a bullet point, no, listing all of the things that our digital natives, Gen Zs, can actually do to be more active in the activism space. But actually, I was thinking as well, maybe they're quite wary about the word activism because there's also a word for advocacy, right? Being the more appropriate
Yeah.
term to thinking beyond yourself. And advocacy is not just
Hmm.
about launching a movement or big kind of actions. Even just for
Yeah.
advocating for yourself is actually a form of advocacy. um, Second
Hmm.
thing, Jules, I had this conversation last night, no, with a friend of mine, and I love that you pointed out how we should always supplement online actions with offline activities, and that goes with any kind of offline campaign. Because I had this question to him about how difficult it is to actually mount offline rallies, for example, right now, people becoming more apathetic, and his response was that because once people go to online world, once they're done with their rants, then they close that chapter of, speaking out about a certain issue, so they move on. And I think that's important, that we have to develop this kind of mindset of activism, that our world is not just limited to social media, which, by the way,
Yes.
one leads me to my point of pinning down to one particular issue specifically on disinformation and misinformation.
Mm.
How do we activate the youth to deal with this specific issue of our times today?
How
The
can we
issue of
activate the
disinformation, yes.
Well, yeah, right now disinformation is really a huge problem in our democracy as a whole. Not just in the Philippines, but globally. Um, I mentioned earlier that social media is now being weaponized. Weaponized for so many agenda, either for political wins, mainly for political wins actually, right? Because um in 2020, or at least in the past administration before 2016 in the Philippines, there was this kind of mindset that social media wouldn't be so much of a factor in the elections, but we were all wrong, right? As early as 2014, 2015, from the Rappler stories I've read, per their investigation, stories were seeded already about Duterte. And then come 2016, there's this whole um, support already, right? For for um, for Duterte to run as president. And then during the campaign, before the campaign season, there were so many back and forths already, right? Duterte will not run, and then he will run, he will not, and he will, and then he eventually did, right? So that kind of strategy really worked for the Philippines. That kind of drama. I mean, Filipinos love drama, right? I mean, we have teleseries every day. So that kind of drama really worked for us. So from his entire term, right? So many bloggers or influencers were tapped to pound on so many messaging. Um, I wouldn't go into the specific issues already, but think of messaging A. Like, for example, messaging A, this message needs to be disseminated. And then you have the government communications agency, and then you have the influencers with so many networks. That kind of structure really worked for them. So the question right now is, how can we replicate that kind of successful structure for the truth, right? Because usually, um, I mean, when I was with Rappler, I was working with the team for Facts First PH, and our main challenge was how can we make the truth fun, sexier, something that people will really be passionate about of. Because it's not usually drama, right? It's usually boring. The truth usually is boring because yun yung facts eh. So the question right now is how can we replicate that kind of successful structure from their strategy for the truth, for democracy. And I think what we did with Facts First PH was a good start because we did not only work with media outfits. It was basically a four layer. So you had the media outfits. So we tried to engage with so many media organizations. The second layer is the CSOs, the civil society organizations, because you have the CSOs with so many networks of organizations, and their primary role is to help the media in propagating their factual information. The third one is with the academe, because the academe should be involved in studying why why most consumers are choosing influencers or other sources of information, whether it's wrong or correct. and yeah, basically their main role is to create studies for us to realize the behaviors, the mindset of people, and and interpreting the data as well. And the last layer was the legal layer. The legal layer is very important because we also need to tap the legal sector to, if cases are needed to be filed for those propagating lies, then let's do that, right? So that's the structure of Facts First Page, basically. I mean, I'm not in the position right now to speak for them, but at least that was my experience when I was working with them. So I think the task right now is how can we involve other generations, because right now I think it wouldn't be hard for us to involve the younger generation, especially, I mean, when we were younger we had that feeling, right? We wanted to be involved, we wanted to do something for social good, etc. So it's easier for us to engage with the younger sector. But how about the Gen X, the boomers, right,
Mhm.
who also have a big presence in social media? I think it goes simply, the approach should be very engaging and not antagonizing, because usually there's this, there are so many stories that we hear that they antagonize their elders, that hey, you're fake news, right? Basically you're hitting their ego, and instead of them listening to us, they will just say, I'm I'm your elder, so you should just listen to me, so just shut up, right? So something like that. So we also still need to think of our culture in the Philippines, right? Um, I don't know if this is fortunately or unfortunately that we have this kind of seniority within our society, but I think it's more on being strategic for the young people right now to, still respect your elders, but there are so many ways to approach them respectfully, to make them realize that, hey, um what's your source? Let's see your source. Oh, that's coming from weird looking URL, so let's try to compare it with another source. So yeah, just be creative with your approaches.
Well, thank you, Jules, and for giving us that crash course and that different perspective. I acknowledge this can be uncomfortable conversations with our elders at this point, but we need to have that. We need to advocate to have that conversation. So thank you for putting that out. Before we close, anything that you'd like to share? What's up with Jules Guiang right now? Where can we find you? And how can we follow your journey?
Yeah, so I'm mostly on the on the on the back end right now, compared to what I was doing 10 years ago, no. So I'm with the Asian Development Bank right now. It's a totally different kind of work, but I'm quite enjoying it. But on the advocacy side, of course, the 2030 Youth Force is still there. So if you are an advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals, just visit 2030 Youth Force in the Philippines on Facebook. Then we will just communicate with you there. If you are a business owner in the area in Quezon City, especially in Maginhawa or Malingap, or if you plan to set up a food business here, do visit Maginhawa Food Community, because we are working closely with the LGU, and they're very supportive of us. And yeah, if you're in the area as well, and if you want to eat at the restos here, please visit our restaurants. My family restaurant is Urban Chick here, so I'm just promoting that here. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this conversation.
Well, awesome. Have been looking forward to visit Maginhawa again by the time I visit the Philippines soon.
Hmm.
Well,
Thank
and with
you.
that, we conclude the second episode of the GNA podcast. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Jules, for sharing your
Thank you.
perspective and your insight to us, and for everyone who's tuning in. Remember to follow us in our Facebook channel or subscribe to the GNA podcast channel to stay informed about our latest episodes.
It's been a meaningful episode today, and we've learned a lot of insights from Jules on how the youth can be torchbearers in the fight against disinformation. And in our next episodes, we will explore the role of AI and tech companies and feature guests who are making waves in this space.
This episode is brought to you by Media Civics Lab Fact Checking Academy by the Break the Fake movement in partnership with Internews. We are your hosts, Ayana Garcia.
And I'm Gab Billones, and you're listening to the GNA podcast.